Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we are going to study the chapter of Jeremiah, number 48. That's the prophet Yirmiyahu, Parak Memches. We just studied chapter 47, in which we discussed the prophecy of Jeremiah regarding the nation of the Philistines. And prior to that, we discussed his prophecies regarding the Egyptians, as we are in a series now of the prophet directing his prophecies towards other nations. This chapter 48 is it is directed to the nation of Moab, the Moabites. As we did in the previous chapter, I want to give a little bit of a review of the history of the Moabites, or rather the approach towards the Moabites that the prophets had in general. So I'm going to go through the words of the prophets regarding the nation of Moab, and there are many parallels, similarities between what Yirmiyahu, the prophet here, says and other prophets such as Isaiah and others. The comparisons are great. There are many similar words, similar languages, similar predictions made. So it's pretty clear that this is a prophecy that God had directed towards the nation of Moab, which he gave to several of his prophets. And here we are learning Jeremiah's version of this prophecy. It's rather long. The chapter is rather long in words and verses, but it reads pretty quickly, so we can hopefully get both this introduction and the whole chapter done in one podcast. For starters, I want to take a look at several sources. The first is in Isaiah chapters 15 and 16, which he directs to the Moabites as well. He predicts the downfall and the destruction of the nation of Moab, which will ultimately happen at the hands of the Babylonians, in a similar way to the way Jeremiah predicts the same downfall which we're about to read about. One specific verse in chapter 15 that I want to point out is chapter 15, verse 5, where Isaiah briefly describes his sympathy for the Moabites. Like, while predicting their destruction and while discussing their sins and their evil ways for which they will be punished, he speaks out and says, Libi leMoab yizak, my heart cries out to Moab. Remember this, because Jeremiah is going to say something extremely similar while he is also talking about the sins of the Moabites and the destruction of the Moabites. So I want to point out that verse, so bear that in mind for a moment. I also want to point out in chapter 16, verse 6, where Isaiah discusses Shomanu ge'on Moab ge'mod. We have heard of the haughtiness of Moab, who is very haughty, where Isaiah there is pointing out that one of the sins of the Moabites is their haughtiness. I also want to point out in Isaiah, in chapter 15, verses 3 to 4, and it's worthwhile listening to my podcast on Isaiah 15, where I describe this in more detail, where he describes that Moab was uniquely situated in the desert to be a refuge for refugees running away from wars, people lost that were running away from the more settled countries, that they could have and should have treated refugees properly and appropriately. And he criticized the Moabites for not treating them the way they should, for not treating the refugees and fugitives from other wars the way they should have. Keep those in mind, and that's from the book of Isaiah. I then want to also now point out from the book of Ezekiel, from Yechezkel. Yechezkel in chapter 25, verses 8 through 11, I'm not going to read through them now, also describes the destruction of the Moabites that will occur and the brutality with which it will occur from the Babylonians taking against the Moabites at the time of the destruction of Moab. But Ezekiel does not go too much into the details of what is so bad about the Moabites, what their sins are. So, uh, so I'm not going to read that because it doesn't help us understand what the real problem is nearly as much as the next two prophets that I want to go look at. And for the first one, the next one of those is Amos, the prophet Amos in chapter 2, verses 1 to through 3. He taught where Amos there has small. If you're the first two chapters of Amos, he also directs his prophecies to other nations, and he starts off with the language. I was able to get by with God is saying I can forgive them for 1, 2, 3 sins, but the fourth was the worst. And at the fourth he describes the final straw, the reason why God is going to destroy that nation, and what makes them so bad. And over there he mentions V'al arba'olo ashivenu when he's talking to the fourth sin of the Moabites. I cannot forgive them for the following: Al sirafo asmot melech Edom lasid. When the Moabites had a battle against the land of Edom, and they captured the king of Edom, they were so cruel about it that they burnt the king of Edom's body and used his ashes as mud to build with. So it's just this the not just defeating the enemy but humiliating them and abusing them to a degree that was just one step too far, that God could not handle that kind of cruelty. So first we saw the haughtiness discussed in Isaiah. We saw the fact that they did not help the refugees when they're in a position to help refugees. And in Amos, we see them being criticized for brutality, for cruelty. And then last but not least, I want to bring our attention to another prophet, the prophet Zephaniah, which who also addresses the Moabites, and this is in chapter 2, verses 8 through 11, also addresses the Moabites, and there he addresses a different aspect of their cruelty, and there Zephaniah he criticizes them for the way they made fun of the Israelites at their downfall, the way they laughed and jeered at the people of Israel when they fell to the Assyrians and the Babylonians, and gloating over the enemy's downfall was the criticism. And then especially when we look at verse 10 over there, he refers again and ties this to Zoslam Tachas Gaonam. They are getting punished because of their haughtiness, for being so haughty, and kicherfu vayagdilu alam Adonai Tzvaos, because they insulted and jeered at the people of God. So there he talks about haughtiness and laughing at the people of God. So here we have seeing these other prophets, Ezekiel just talking about their destruction, Isaiah discussing about how they refuse to shelter refugees and emphasizing their haughtiness, Amos emphasizing their just tremendous amount of cruelty, and Zephaniah again talking about haughtiness, but also emphasizing the making fun at the people at their downfall. If we also, and before we read what Jeremiah has to say here, I want to point back to what Jeremiah said in chapter 27, where Moab was mentioned as one of the kings that Tzidkiyahu, the final king of Judah, gathered together several other kings in the area and conspired to make a united front to confront Babylon. The king of Moab was one of those. When the Babylonian king came, Moab double-crossed, said Tzidkiyahu, and ended up fighting on the side of the Babylonians against Judea. So recall that they were were double-crossers. So now we can begin reading through the Jeremiah chapter 48. I'm sorry, I just had to find the verse. So, Limoab, concerning Moab, Ko amar Adonai Tzvaot Elohei Yisrael, so says the Lord God, the God of Israel, Hoi al nevo kishudada, Woe is to Nevo. Nevo is one of the main cities of Moab. There's going to be lots of lists of place names, all of which are cities, towns, and areas in the land of Moab. Kishu Dada. Woe is to Nevo because she has been devastated. Hovisha Nilkida Kiryatayim. The place called Kiryatayim has been shamed and captured. Hovisha Hamisgav V'chata. The fortress, the Moabite fortress, has been shamed and shattered. There's an emphasis here on shame because, as we will see, Jeremiah is going to emphasize the haughtiness of the Moabites. And obviously the punishment for haughtiness is to be shamed. Ein od tihilat Moab b'cheshbon. In this pasuk, in this verse, there's some words here that you can only catch the poetry in Hebrew. He says there shall no longer be any more glory for Moab, and then he says a place name, and then the punishment is constructed from the same root word. So there's kind of a play on words here. I'll read it in Hebrew. B'cheshvon chashvu aleha ra'ah. In the city of Cheshbon, they plotted disaster. The first word is the name of the place, Cheshbon, and Chashvu is the disaster that they plotted for to destroy Cheshbon. Lechu v'nachrisehna migai. Let us go and cut her down from being a nation. And now again, we're about to read another one of those plays on words. Gam madmein tidomi. Madmein is the city shall be silenced. Tidomi means silenced, but of course it is constructed from the same letters as madmein. So again, that play on words. Acharayich telech charev. After you, the sword is going to chase you. Kol tza'aka, and I'm about to read verse 3. Kol tza'aka me choronayim, there's a cry coming out of the place called Choronayim, another place name. There's lots of place names here. Shod vashever gadol. There will be devastation and a great collapse. Let me point out that many of these place names we know from the Mesha Stela, which is a famous archaeological find written by the Moabites, describing, among other things, their victory over the Israelites. But they list a lot of these place names. So we have other, references from extra biblical sources describing these names of these cities. Nishbira Moab, this is verse 4. Moab has been broken. Hishmi'u ze'akat ze'ira. Her young people have let loose a great scream. Ki ma'alei haluchis b'v'chi ya'aleh b'v'chi. This is verse 5. Because on the ascent, on the way up to Luchit, which must be a city that was high on the mountain, on the way up to Luchit, crying shall follow crying. People shall, why there be so much crying on that road that leads to that place is ki v'morad choronayim, because on the way down from Choronayim, which is another town in that area, Tzorei tza'akat shever shameu, the enemies have heard the sounds of the collapse of the city. Nusu maltu nafshechem. Run, flee, save your lives. This is Jeremiah speaking to the Moabites. Run, get away. V'tiyena ka'aro erba midbar. Get away and get out into the desert. If you recall, I pointed out that one of the criticisms of Moab was the fact that they had the opportunity to be, but were not kind to refugees. This emphasis on their punishment, that they are going to be like refugees in the desert, is an important emphasis, and Jeremiah is going to repeat it several times. Aroer bamidbar. Aroer is a town, is the name of a town in the desert of Moab, but it also refers to a lonely tree in the desert. So this is also a play on words here, saying go run and be like that lonely tree in the desert who's lost and all alone. In other words, you're going to feel like those refugees that came to you for help, but you did not help them. Kiyan, because, and Jeremiah specifies this in verse 7, because you have bitchech, you have had trust b'ma'asayach, in all of your wealth of otrosayach and in the treasures. You, Moab, were so wealthy. Gam at tilachedi. Therefore now you also will end up becoming captives. V'yatzah Chemosh Bagola, and your God Chemosh, and we're going to hear about their God. Chemosh was the god of the Moabites. Will go into exile. Kohanav, all of her priests, his priests, V'sarav, and his officers, Yachtov, will all go together. Your God's going to do nothing for you. So he's saying here, and this is an important point to point out here in verse 7, he's pointing it out, that the specific type of haughtiness that Moab had was because of their wealth. They were wealthy, and we will soon see, and they lived peacefully, and everything was fine. But instead of using that wealth to help others, to help captives, to help refugees, they instead laughed at others' people's downfall, which again we're going to see shortly, that they laughed at the others people that were less fortunate than them, and instead of helping them. Let's go on to verse 8. Because of this behavior, Vayavo shoded el kol ir ve'ir lo timaleit. The marauder shall come to every town, no town will be spared. V'avad ha'emek v'nishmar hamishar, and the valley will be ruined, the plains will be destroyed. Asher amar Adonai, as God has said. Verse 9, to nutzitz l'Moav. Again, this is a little sparkle of sympathy for the Moabites, which we found in Isaiah, and we're going to see a little bit here and a little bit more in later verses that Jeremiah has. Give some wings to the Moabites, so that she can take flight and get away from this destruction, because it's so bad. V'arel shamati yana, and her cities are now become a desolation, me'ein yoshev ben, with no one living there. This next verse is directed at the marauders, at the attackers, the Babylonians. Arur osem melechet Adonai remia. Be strong about your battle. Go and attack the Moabites and do the work of God strong. And cursed is the one who does it deceitfully, in other words, the lazy soldier. V'arur moneach arbo midam. And cursed is the one who takes his sword and holds it rather than kill. In other words, God's instructions are to use the sword against the Moabites. Be a strong soldier, perform your duty, and kill the enemy. Sha'anan Moav min urav. Moab, and here's where it says, again, Moab, we mentioned, were wealthy, they were rich, they had treasures, and they also had peace, relative peace, much more peace than the other nations, especially the nation of Judea. Mostly because of the geography. Judea is in a place where everyone needs to pass through from Egypt and Africa going into the Middle East. And Moab was kind of a little bit off to the side, and they had peace, minura, from when they were young. V'shoketu el shemarav, and the symbol of the wealth of peacefulness is old wine. Old wine can sit in a barrel for years and years, and it gets better and better and better, and wealthier and more rich. So, and this is what Moab was. They were at peace, they were able to gather wealth, and they were quiet, sitting on shemarav, which is the yeast that gathers and the stuff that gathers at the bottom of old wine and helps the old wine age and make it even better. V'lohurak mikli. It was never like the people that have to run, they're constantly pouring it out from one bottle into another bottle into another bottle. They never allow it to truly age well because they're on the run. But the Moabites, he didn't have to go into exile like so many of the other nations did. Alkein Amad Tamabo, which is why his taste remained there, meaning the Moabites remained wealthy and remained peaceful. V'reicholo namar, and the sweet smell of the good old wine didn't get altered, didn't go bad. This is how they lived. But they didn't use their wealth for the proper reasons. So therefore, hinei yamim ba'imnu Adonai, there are days approaching, says God, v'shilachti lo tzoim v'tzeuhu v'chelav yariku. I am going to send out people that are going to spoil that wine, and they're going to spoil the wine, and they're going to take that wine and they're going to pour it out. Of course, this is just metaphoric, meaning will destroy the people and their wealth that they were so arrogant about. V'nivleihem yinapetzu, and he will smash the jugs in which they store their fancy wine. Uvosh Moav mikamosh. Moab, who has faith in their God Chemosh, they're going to be embarrassed because of Chemosh. Just like Ha'asher Boshu Beis Yisrael, just like the northern kingdom of Israel, who worshipped the calves that they put in in Beit El, in their temple, mi Beit El mivtacham, just like they were embarrassed and ashamed when their idols that they worshipped didn't save them from the Assyrians, Moab will be embarrassed from how their God, Chemosh, doesn't save them from the Babylonians. Eich tomru giborim anachnu. How is it that you can still say, and this is Jeremiah talking to the Moabites, we are strong and powerful, v'yanshe chayla milchama, and we have soldiers that are trained for war. How can you say that? Look at what's happening to you. Shudad Moab v'yareha Allah. Moab is devastated. Her cities are gone. Umivchar bachurav yardu hatavach, and his finest youth have went to be slaughtered. Hamelach Adonai Tzvaot Shemo. So says the true king, whose name is God, the Lord of hosts. Karov Eid Moed Lavo v'ra'aso mi'arama od. The doom, the end of Moab is coming close, and the evil that's going to befall Moab is coming really soon. Nudu lo kol sevivav. Grieve all of those who are around him. B'chol yodei shemo. Here again we have this little sliver of sympathy for the downfall of the enemy, but there's still a little sympathy for the downfall of Moabites. Everyone cry for them. Anyone that knows the name of the Moabites, Imru, say, Eicha nishbar mate oz. How is it that this great staff of strength has been broken? Makel tifara, the staff of such glory. Remember, they were wealthy. The staff of strength, the staff of glory. How is it that all of a sudden now they've seen destruction? Redeem mikavodu shavivat. Descend from your glory, because remember, the punishment for arrogance is descent from arrogance, is shame and embarrassment. Ushavi vatzama, now sit and thirst. Yosheves bas Divon, she who lives in the daughter of Divon, meaning the people that live in the place name, another place named Divon in Moab. Kishodeid Moab alabach, because the one who has devastated Moab has now reached you. Shichas mivtzorayach, he has destroyed your fortresses that were there to defend you. Al derech imdi, now that you are a refugee, stand on the side of the road, v'tzapio sheves aroer, and wait for the refugees that are coming out of the town of Aroer that has been destroyed. And sha'ali nos v'nimlata, and ask the ones who are running, ask the refugees that are running, imri mani yasa, ask them what's going on. And unfortunately, these next few verses is going to be their answer. People are going to describe, you want to know what's going on? This is what's going on. Verse 20, Hovish Moab ki chata helilu uzaaku. Shamed is Moab, for she is broken. Wail, scream, shriek, and cry. Hagidu v'Arnon ki shutad Moab. Tell it at the Arnon. Tell everyone that Moab has been destroyed. Umishpat ba'al eretz michar. Judgment has finally come against the land of the tableland. This is an elevated plain. Judgment has come because they recognize that this was a punishment for their sins. Then it started listing the towns that have been destroyed: El Chalon, Ve'el Yatzav, Ve'el Mefaat, Ve'el Divon, Ve'el Navo, Ve'el Beit Tivlatayim, Ve'el Kiryatayim, Ve'el Beit Kemul, Ve'el Beit Mon. I'm not translating these are just town names. Ve'al Kiryot, Ve'al Batra, Ve'al Kol Eretz Moab. This is verse 24. And against all the cities of Moab, Harachokot Ve'akavot, the faraway ones and the close by ones. Nigda'ah, Karen Moab, the horn of Moab has been cut down. Uzra Onish Bara, and her Adonai, and her strength has been broken. So says God. Up to verse 26 now. Hashkiruhu. Make him drunk. If you recall, we've had many times when the destruction comes and the people are just so overwhelmed by the feeling that they've been described as being drunk. Because the kosa tare la, but actually that particular verse refers to a poisonous drink. But here it's describing the people that are being destroyed and just running and have no place to run or hide as being drunk. Hashkiruhu. Make him drunk, because he has made himself great against God. Again, criticizing their haughtiness against God. V'sofak Moab b'ki'o, and let him roll about in his vomit. And now let him also be the object of laughter. Remember, again, just like he laughed at the others when they suffered, now it's his turn to be the object of the laughing stock. And then Jeremiah explains it clearly. Yisrael, weren't you just laughing at the Israelites last time? As if he was just a common thief that gets put in a stockade and people laugh at him. You used to laugh at the Israelites. Now it's your turn to be the one who the people are laughing at. Because whenever you spoke about Israelites, then you shook with scorn and made fun and so on. Therefore, your punishment is coming. Go ahead, you're going to have to leave your cities. You're going to have to look for places to hide in the rocks, hide in the mountains, Yoshvei Moab, you who reside in Moab. V'hiyuki Onan, you're going to be like a Yonah, a dove. A dove looks for a place to nest in a place which is safe, where the predators can't get to her babies. So they find clefts in the rock and cliffs that are very hard to get to. That's what you're going to have to look like. You're going to have to look like the dove. You're going to have to look for places in the rocks to hide so that the armies that are after you can't get you. To Kanein, Be'evrei Pipachat, you are going to nest in the crevices in the rocks of cliffs. Shamanu Gaon Moab Ge'emeod. Here he directly goes after the haughtiness of the Moabites. We have heard about the arrogance of the Moabites. He was extremely arrogant. His loftiness, his hubris, his pride, and his arrogant heart. Ani adati no Adonai. I know, God says, Evraso v'lochein, that his anger, that Moab's hatred for his enemies have no meaning to it. Badav lochein asu. I know that his illusions have come to naught. This is kind of difficult to translate what it's referring to. I do think it's talking about how he was a double crosser. You know, his lochein asu, his plans, his wickedness, badav lochein, have been dishonest asu, and that's how they did them. In other words, referring to the double crossing of the Jews when they switched sides to the Babylonians. Al Cain, therefore, and here's where Jeremiah sounds a lot like Isaiah did again. Al Moab Ayelil, I will cry for Moab. Ul Moab kulo ezak, almost the same words that Isaiah used. Libi leMoab ezak, and I'm going to cry for the Moabites. Al Anshe Kircheres Yageh, I will moan and mourn for the men of Kircheres, another town in Moab, because of the terror that happened to them. Mivchi Yazerev Kalach, even more than I weep for Yazer, which is another city, I cry for you, Hagef and Sivma, the vineyards of Sivma. They were so beautiful and so bountiful. What you had, I cry for you. Netishotayech avruyam, the branches of your grapes used to extend over the waters. Ad Yam Yazer Nago, they reached the sea of Yazer. Al Ketzech, which must be some lake or body of water. Al Kitzech, Al Bitzirech Shoded Nafal, the devastator has fallen upon your summer fruits and your vintage wines. V'ne'esfa simcha v'gil, all of the happiness and joy that you used to have, mi Carmel, from the Eretz Moab, from the Carmel is fruitful farms, Eretz Moab, and from the land of Moab, v'yayin mi kavim mishpati, and wine that used to be in the wine presses, I have made an end to them. Lo yidroch heidad, heidad lo heidad. No one treads them, calling out heidad, heidad, which is what the people used to cry out when they were stomping on the grapes to make them into wine. Mi za'akat cheshbon ad el oleh, from the screams have reached from Cheshbon, another city there, all the way to El Alei, another city. Ad Yatz Nasnu Kolam, until the town of Yatz, their voices were heard. Mitzor ad Chornaim, from the place of Torah until Chornaim, Eglat Shalishiyah, they have all the way to the powerful Eglah, another place. Kigam mei nimrim limshamot you. Even the waters of Nimrim shall become desolate. V'hishpati l'Moab nom Adonai, I will destroy Moab, says God. Ma'alebama maktir leloav, all of those people that made shrines and burned incense to their gods, Chemosh, I will destroy them. Al Cain, once again, Jeremiah speaks of some mercy he has for the feelings of pity for the Moabites. Al Cain libi l'Moab kachalilim yameh. My heart moans for Moab like flutes that are played at a funeral. V'libi elanche kircheres, and my heart is thinking about the men who died from kircheres kachalilim yameh. Again, they cries out like the flute of a mourner. Al Cain yitrat asa avadu. Therefore, because all of the wealth that they had accumulated, it was such a beautiful country with so much wealth and so much bounty, has been destroyed. Kichol rosh karcha, now every head is shaven in mourning. V'chol zakan gerua, and every beard is shaven. Also, custom of mourning that they had. Al kol yadayim gedudos, there are scratches and gashes in hands. We've had that custom of mourning several times. V'al masnayim sok, and on all of people are wearing is sackcloth. Al kol gagos Moab, on all the rooftops of the houses of Moab, and her streets, kulom esbeit, is full of people crying and mourning. Ki shavarti et Moab kechli ein chayfetz bon el, like a vessel that nobody wants anymore. Ei chata helilu, how shattered the people cried out. How smashed is Moab. Eich hifna oref Moab, how is it that Moab had to turn and run, bosh, and in such a shameful and embarrassed and degraded way. Moab has now become a laughing stock and a source of horror for all those that surround them. Because this is what God has said. This is the reason. He, meaning the destroyer, Babylon, will fly like an eagle, and he will spread his wings over Moab. Nilkedah kriot, he is going to capture the towns. V'amisadot nitpasa, he will seize the fortresses. V'yalev giboyer Moab b'yomahu kelevi shamet seira, and the hearts of the defenders of Moab will be like the hearts of a woman in labor who is afraid and in pain. V'nishmad Moab me'am ki al Adonai higdil, and the Moab will be destroyed from being a nation. They will no longer be a nation because they were so arrogant over God. They thought that they themselves were greater than God. Pachad v'fachas v'fach. This is verse 43. Panic, pit, and a snare upon you. Yoshev Moab, you who live in Moab, no Adonai, says God. In what way? Hanas mipnei pachad, the one who is running because of fear, yipol ala pachas, will end up falling into the pit. V'ha'olim min ha'pachas, and when they climb out of the pit, yilached ba'pach, they will get snapped up by the snare, by the trap. Ki avi elel Moab shenas b'kudasom nom Adonai, because I am going to bring upon Moab the time of its retribution. So says God. B'tzel cheshbon, those who fled, amdu mikoach nasim, those who fled from the power of the enemy and stood in the shadow of Cheshbon. Ki eish yatzah mi Cheshbon, they were destroyed because Cheshbon was burnt down. Fire came from Cheshbon, v'lehavami bein Sichon, and a flame came from the midst of the town of Sichon. V'tochal pat Moab v'kadkod b'nei She'on, and it ate up the corners of Moab and the foreheads of the people of She'on. Oilucha Moab, woe is to you, Moab. Avad am Kemosh, the nation that worshipped the god Kemosh is gone. Ki lukhu v'necha b'sheva, your children have been taken into captivity. Uv'notecha b'shivya, your daughters into captivity. However, and this is the final verse, I told you this chapter was long, but this is the last one. God says that Moab will not be completely and utterly destroyed. This is in distinction to what he said about the Philistines, who were completely destroyed. Moab will suffer this terrible destruction from Babylon, but Babylon will allow the people of Moab to come back and resettle at some point in the future. When this will be is not clear, but Vishavti Shvut Moab, I will bring back the remnant of the Moabites B'achrit Hayamim, in the end of days, whether this means in the days to come in the future, one day sometime in the future, or whether this means that later on in the Babylonian kingdom they will allow some resettlement of Moabites in their land. God says, I will not completely and utterly wipe Moab from the face of the earth. Ad hena mishpat Moab. Until this point, I was speaking about the judgment against Moab. Those are the words of Jeremiah the prophet before he moves on to the next subject, which is in chapter 49. Thank you so much for studying chapter 48 together. Looking forward to studying chapter 49 and the rest of the book together.